You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
You know, Sabria, one of the things that we really enjoyed doing over the last few weeks was going to the Black Footwear Forum national event in Detroit at the Pencil Lewis College of Business and Design. You and I have been working behind the scenes on the Black Footwear Forum for years now, but this was a culmination of the industry coming together, Black employees in our industry coming together for what was dubbed a homecoming, right? But the energy and the spirit in the room was just so phenomenal. I was so thrilled to be able to share that with you, having not been able to share that with you because of COVID and you're starting just before COVID. But kind of what were your initial thoughts on the Black Footwear Forum in Detroit that we hosted just a few weeks ago?
I thought it was awesome. I was super excited about going. I had attended some of the regional events, and so I was hyped up. I was elated just to be there, be in the room, to be in a room of Black excellence. It was amazing. It was awesome for me, so I enjoyed it.
Yeah, excellence is the key term there because our next guest, and I'll have you introduce him, is someone who is excellent in many ways. He has a heart of gold. He is he's just a great guy to talk with, to speak with. He has a passion for kids and education. And he hosted a panel at the event and just brought a ton of energy and a ton of critical thought in a positive way to the conversation. So Bria, who do we have on Shoe and Show today?
Today we have on Jason Mayden, who is a designer, educator, entrepreneur, author. And I'm sure as we talk more to him, we'll find out so much more. But welcome, Jason. How are you?
Oh man, I'm well. Thank you for having me on the show. As always, it's a blessing to be amongst my peers and colleagues. So I feel grateful to be on this discussion with you guys.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So Jason, one of the things we asked, it's a little hokey, but you know what? We learn something new every time. What is your shoe story? I just asked this to Sean Williams a few minutes ago, but how on earth, and his was very long because he's been in the industry for a long time, but how did you get in the industry? Kind of what's your journey to footwear?
My journey to footwear started at 7 years old when I was in a hospital. So I had something called septicemia, which is a severe blood infection. And I had come across this fictitious character named Dr. Lucius Fox as I was laying in the hospital reading Batman comics.
Dang,
it's actually
Batman.
Yeah. And in Batman 307, Lucius was revealed. And in my 7-year-old mind, I had convinced myself that if I wanted to grow up and design products for superheroes, that I had to be like Lucius. And Michael Jordan was the closest thing to Bruce Wayne growing up in Chicago. So I kind of thought I could design his gear, I can design his shoes. And from there, I just started to obsess over the detailing of those products. I would stare at my classmates' footwear when they came to class with the new Jordans. I started writing letters to Nike. And then eventually I got rejected for the first time trying to get an internship my freshman year in college. Got rejected my sophomore year, then finally got an internship at Nike my junior year in Jordan Brand, which is a phenomenal outcome considering I was their first design intern and Nike's first Black industrial design intern. So my shoe story was more of a story of perseverance and imagination and creativity and wonder and reverence for this object that seemingly had made someone superhuman. I think of Michael as a modern day myth, meaning he's more like Perseus. If you look at Greek mythology, Perseus had wings on his shoes and he saved Andromeda, the Ethiopian princess, from this monster. Michael had wings on his shoe. So immediately I thought, okay, this man is a demigod. He's otherworldly. Something about him is magical. And as a kid, you reinforce that narrative every single time you see something or you read something. You just have to go out and live within this dream that you've concocted in your mind. So that's my shoe story, man. I wanted to design gadgets for superheroes, and Michael was the closest superhero that I could think of in Chicago.
So you are helping me nerd out in a sense because sneakers and comic books are that's my jam as well, in the sense that I love Batman. all you had to say is Lucia, and I knew exactly where you're going. Morgan Freeman plays him beautifully in the Dark Knight trilogy, but we can have a whole different podcast about that. So as you think about getting in the industry and writing letters and the myth that is Michael Jordan, which is true, and I'm a Magic guy, right? I like Jordan 91 finals were like a heartbreaker for me. I had Magic Johnson shoes when I had some Jordans. I was in Magic Johnson shoes. So I'm like a Magic guy, and it pains me to be so to kind of bow at the altar of Michael Jordan. But it's true, man. And he has kind of built this industry and attracted all this interest into the industry that's been critical to the success of this industry. So the Black Footwear Forum wouldn't exist without Michael Jordan. And there's many of the strength of FDRA wouldn't exist without Michael Jordan. And he has such a huge impact on the industry. But setting that aside, kind of as you think about your journey, what are you kind of got your hands in now? What are you focused in on now that is helping to kind of educate the next generation as to what the opportunities are? Because that's key, I think, to driving more diversity within our ranks, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. Well, there's several things that I focus on because I sit at the intersection of technology, education, entrepreneurship, design, culture. I'm naturally a polymath, which means that I've been fortunate enough to be educated in multiple disciplines. A lot of what I've done, what they call autodidactic, is you self-teach. And when you grow up in the inner city, teaching yourself things is a method of survival and enhancement for your daily activity. I've turned it into a lifestyle where I don't wait on someone to give me information. I go and figure it out, or I go and create a pathway to this information to be revealed to me just by simply trying and failing in public on purpose. What I focus on now is I'm a huge advocate for education. I do believe that we haven't transitioned yet to a world where I believe young Black creatives can just, walk into a corporation and demand a job without having some form of traditional training. That's still a barrier to entry. That's still a reason people can tell us no.
Right.
So I always think, how can someone tell me no? And I try to eliminate that. I do believe that my children's children will only be focused on developing skill sets. They may not have to play that game of having certain educational pedigree. They can just display what they do because the tools are ubiquitous and they can build things, and that's their method of showing their value. Second, I do angel investing. So I realized that the issue with the diversity topic that I find really compelling is everyone's focused on the talent pipeline. No one's focused on retention. Talented people will go to a corporation. Corporations do not have an issue finding a talented Black person. They have issues keeping them. That's the real conversation. We go and then we leave. So this myth of we can't find them. No, you can't keep us. You make sure you tell us that we don't culturally fit in because we don't do things that you believe are cultural norm. And in my case, in the company I worked for, a lot of it had to do with things that I just don't do in my personal life. I don't drink. I don't believe in infidelity. I don't believe in misogyny. I don't believe in bullying. I don't believe in mistreating people to advance. I do believe that, you have to accrue some form of power to have impact, but you don't have to accrue power at the cost of other people's sovereignty and other people's identity. And so naturally, that always put a target on my back. You don't fit in. This is just the culture. I don't believe being an a-hole is the culture. I think it's a specific choice. And I think if a person is demonized to make an opposite choice of being a good guy, it shouldn't be a reason for them to be pushed out of corporation. So that's the conversation that I focus on with the diversity topic is what about retention? Because recruitment is not hard. We come to the companies. Then the fourth thing that I'm really becoming presently passionate about is, this topic of what I'm calling industrial artistry. So there's commercial artists, there are fine artists, and people like myself who make things that are mass produced that are now considered a new asset class, we're industrial artists. The difficulty with that topic is we cannot get provenance. It's exceptionally hard because a lot of the great creatives that sit in corporations are buried underneath a pile of paperwork, NDAs, non-competes, and the world will never know that they exist. And it makes this whole industry suffer because it makes it look like creativity is monolithic and only a few people, aka the collaborators, are the ones who are creative. Only these athletes have access to creativity. They're the ones who make the shoe. When there's some kid, some woman, some young person that has come from this design school or this other company that's busting their butt, but the world doesn't know they exist because they're trapped behind bureaucracy. And so I don't have that level of paperwork. So I can speak openly about being an industrial artist, speak openly about this asset class that we've created that we now call, footwear and secondary markets.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that's important is as this industry grows and our impact grows, we have to be able to capture the upside value of what we do. Now, designers don't get royalties. Designers can barely even unionize to take care of ourselves. And I see so many veterans that are just forced out of companies. They age out, or what we say, they take the pen out of their hand. And then these people bounce around as hired guns, and then they eventually fizzle out, and they have no actual way to hold value in the later stages of their career. Design is something you get better at as you get older. It isn't a perishable skill. It isn't like football or basketball or baseball. The older you get, the better you make choices, the more refined you are, the more calm you are. I mean, we celebrate in every other industry designers who age, right? You look at Dieter Rams. Dieter Rams is almost 90 years old. You'll still hear him talk about brawn and modernism and simplicity. But in footwear, it's so interesting. The moment you hit 30, somehow you need to move into management and you no longer can sketch shoes because you're not the kid anymore. But only a couple people still get to hold relevancy, and they push this narrative that there's one great thinker and he's the one or she's the one. I find it ridiculous. There's a ton of people that hold value. There's a ton of people that should be celebrated. So those are the 4 things I'm passionate about, man, and making sure that we really discuss this emergent asset class and that the creators of this class get the credit.
Yeah, and how you kind of bring that leverage to the creator themselves. Because I have to imagine as a creator creating, which is kind of woven into us as human beings, we have a creator ourselves, and we are creating ourselves. The gift's been given to us, which is phenomenal. You drive over an amazing bridge, you see an amazing piece of art or an amazing pair of sneakers, and you think there's this creative energy that's gone into that has been blessed to us. But I have to imagine if you're a designer, you see that out there in the marketplace, and you did it, but it's no longer yours. It's got to be a difficult pill to swallow. But it's kind of the nature of the beast in the industry that we find ourselves in. Is that what I'm hearing?
I wouldn't say it's difficult. I think for me, I get joy out of seeing people wearing my products, specifically when I see people wear my products who normally wouldn't even care about me. That's right. The kicker.
Interesting.
Like I designed a Monarch, and that demographic who wears that product and the muse for that product are normally people who would look at me and just, not assume the best of me just based on where I grew up or how I look. But the job of design is to be a quick expert about things that may or may not affect you directly. And it's to lead with sheer curiosity and empathy and design for people who are different than you.
Right.
Willingly, right? And so seeing it out in the world and seeing people wearing it, that is the return. But as these industries evolve and we're moving into a technological ecosystem that allows provenance and allows attribution to be embedded in the blockchain, it's imperative that industrial artists have that same level of care and consideration, because it does determine their earning potential and their value as they leave company to company or they go and start their own. It's really hard to see what a person did in a group project, because most footwear now are group projects. There's a million people that are involved, and one person may only do color. One person may only do the outsole, which makes it even more of a conundrum to give credit to people without leveraging modern technology and just being open about attribution. It was easier for me because I did everything, right? We had our developer, our PLM, I drew it. I thought about the cross sections. I went to Asia to help develop it. And most of the times we were making samples by hand. Companies have grown, design teams have grown. And so now a young designer may only do 5% of the process. And so when they go out into the world and they present their portfolio, hiring managers are like, well, what did you actually do? What did the agency do? What did the PM? So it's getting really, really hard to say, here is what I've contributed to this process. So I think that's the real difficulty there is how do you capture and how do you attribute this creation to the proper people and give them the proper value associated with it?
Yeah, that has to be a difficult thing. I didn't even think about that kind of collective approach to designing a pair of shoes. I have one more question on the design space, and then I want to pivot with Sabria over to the Black Footwear Forum and talk to you. I have a specific question about that. But talk to us about how design works. So let's just take the history of the Jordan, year after year, and you've had Tinker and Wilson and Dwayne and others who've designed Jordans. How does a brand select who the designer will be? Is there like a Shark Tank kind of a competition internally? Is it someone early on who pivots, leadership says, hey, you're going to take the lead on this, and so run with it. How does that work? I want our listeners to be able to envision what happens behind the scenes when a designer is selected for such an iconic shoe brand such as Jordan.
Yeah. In my era, in Jordan Brand, which was I would say the foundational era, it really was a meritocracy. I was the youngest person on the team. I was barely past the age of 19 when I was an intern, and I got to design the Air Jordan 17 Mule. That happened because I had a specific business insight that was margin and brand accretive. And so, you didn't get chosen to do the Air Jordan. You advocated for yourself, and your skill set and effort selected you. So, it was, like I said, for lack of a better word, a true meritocracy. It wasn't, most of the time, it was senior designers or people who were ready to take on that level of political leadership, because the Air Jordan literally is designed by committee, and everyone has an opinion, which is funny because it's the Monarch and it's the Air Jordan are the two most discussed products, and then the Air Max, right? Like those are like franchise beachhead products. And I've done two of them, right? The Monarch was heavily discussed because it's a margin driver and people had a lot of opinions. The Air Jordan, it's a cultural driver. People have a lot of opinions. So what they're looking for is someone who's tolerant, who's emotionally neutral, who's mature enough to fight for their ideas and not back down under the weight of legacy and heritage. Because each shoe is supposed to challenge the status quo. It's supposed to make people hate it or love it. If you have a shoe that is kind of in the middle and it's lukewarm, you fail with the Jordan. It should either be revered or it should be completely disregarded. And that was what was told to me, when I was selected after, I think 5 years. I was a senior designer, and, I ascended up the ladder at Nike rather quickly simply because of the amount of work we were doing and the value we had to capture for the brand to get it from being roughly around 100 million to $1 billion within like 4 years. So when I was picked, it was a dream come true because that was my childhood mission, to design the Air Jordan. So it wasn't about age, it was about effort and impact. Some people disagree. They're like, he's too young. But I'm like, if I'm old enough to vote and I'm old enough to have children and own a home, I think I'm ready to design a shoe. I think I've had more responsibility raising a child than designing a product.
Right.
If you can give LeBron James $100 million out of high school, I think I can draw a shoe. So it's just this myth of readiness that wasn't as prevalent back then as it is now, because that conversation was literally a few seconds. Dwayne was like, Jason's doing it. Anyone disagree? Oh, he's young. He's like, look at what he's done. And then I was on the project.
Wow.
So, yeah, I have a question. So I recently went to school for UX UI design. And as I was working on some projects, I always, I wonder how much can a designer put, themselves into a product? Do you have to balance, I guess, what the company wants and their limitations and, trends and what the audience wants? Are you able to have that freedom to put your idea and yourself into your product?
Yeah,
or is it kind of tough
did.
to do that? Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did. I fought for that because the reality is I didn't put my taste. I put my insight. The company is just a collection of people. The company doesn't exist. It's a mythical thing that we've given a personified identity. Corporations are viewed as humans in the eyes of the law, and we overemphasize the power of the company. You take away people, there is no company. So there is no way that Nike does things. There's the way that people work at Nike does things. There is no way Adidas. It's the way that people work at Nike. So the culture produces the artifact. At that time, my mindset was very similar to what I learned from working with Derek Jeter. Somebody has saved their money to come, see Derek play for the first time. He has to deliver on what they believe, he is. Somebody saved their money to buy my product for the first time, right? I couldn't assume that everyone could afford my products. I couldn't assume that everyone had access to Jordans frequently. I didn't growing up. So I took that into account of every project I worked on. There were times where I got to display my personal taste, but I'm obsessed over solving the problem for the consumer, which at that point was the athlete, and then eventually it became the artist or musician or entertainer. So as long as it's true to solving the problem that I've discovered or capturing the opportunity that I've uncovered for that demographic, I don't have to worry about my personal taste, but I can, fight for my personal insight, meaning what I research, what's empirically provable. I don't believe in qualitative data dictating a designer because there's a lot of bias in the briefs. When we look at why products don't work, it starts at the briefing phase. There's a tremendous amount of people that have no actual academic research background that are telling you, hey, I've researched this thing through a focus group, which is essentially forcing people to agree with you, because nobody's going to sit in the room honestly and tell you what they think. When you got 16-year-old kids, you're pulling out shoes and you're like, you think this is cool? Of course they're going to agree with you. They don't want to be asked to leave. So none of the data they provided to us was relevant. So me being an academic, I would push for more credible sources of insight. What's happening economically? What's happening sociologically? What's happening psychologically? What's happening from a physiological standpoint with health? Like, I look at every factor that contributes to what we call well-being, and then I make an informed decision about what's the product that's going to solve the problem. If you come to me and say, make something cool or hot, I'm like, what does that even mean in context? It's not my, like, what does it mean to be contextually cool? What's cool in Chicago is not cool in LA, it's not cool in Japan, not cool. There's these nuances.
Yeah.
And that's where, having empathy as a designer gives us an advantage, because we look at nuance and we consider nuance, and we don't believe things are monolithic. Companies believe things are monolithic. They give you this archetype, 18-year-old basketball player. And there's so many different layers beyond that label. So for me, I dig beneath the surface of the brief, and I try to find the insight that's most, universally true for the most amount of people.
Let me tap into that research term, because I think some people just think designers have like a creative kind of gut, or it's like Jackson Pollock. You're just spattering, art against the wall and seeing what sticks. But in talking to Dwayne, and Jordan actually does a really good job on his website of kind of tracking each of the releases every year and kind of what the inspiration was behind it. But on the 22s, right? Dwayne went to, I guess, Lockheed Martin, looked at the F-22, the Raptor, took some of the design elements of that jet and incorporated them in the design of the shoe. And so you think about the due diligence that a designer takes on. And as an academic and a designer, Jason, was that your approach? Was it field trips and engagement, and kind of how long was that process? I'm super fascinated by the fact that Dwayne went to Lockheed Martin to look at a jet to figure out how to inform him how to design an amazing pair of shoes. So talk to us about your process, whether it's different or similar or somewhere in between.
Yeah, mine is different, but similar at the same time. So Dwayne's process, that's what we would call design inspiration, right? You're pulling, aesthetic cues, you're pulling finishes and details to help form the shape of the product. What I do is I look at insights, extracting actual insights around what is the true problem each product is intended to solve, and for how many people. So I use the inspiration as a storytelling layer to help me finish it, to make it look a certain way, have certain colors, certain DNA. But my process is very similar to forensic psychology. So crime scene analysis. I had the good fortune of studying or shadowing a gentleman who was someone that was a forensic composite. What do they call it? The person that does the composite sketches for criminals. And I was fascinated, like, how could you come up with a composite sketch based on limited amounts of information, studying their environment, looking at the crime scene, and then deducing that this is the person with the psychological profile that most likely did this. And so I learned a little bit of that CSI magic, and I applied it to the locker room. And I said, okay, if I walk in a locker room with no athletes present, what could I learn about their behavioral signatures and their behavioral triggers and their personalities just by studying the locker room, just by studying the bags that they carry and what's in the bag and how they move. So I would observe without them present, and then I would observe and engage, and then I would do a form of pattern matching, meaning method acting. So if Derek Jeter had a certain schedule, I would try to match that schedule to understand the psychological duress that he's under. I don't have the same pressures he has, but if I have to wake up at 4 a.m, do this workout, do this thing, I can start to see like, oh, okay, here's these inflection points where I may need to create something that gives him a jolt of energy or a jolt of, inspiration so he can continue with his task. So I took that approach to it, the psychology side, because people have to remember, athletes are human beings, and they transform into their persona when they play the games that they play. They don't keep that energy off the court. They don't keep that energy off the field. Most times it's a separate personality, because you have to tap into something to be that competitive and that aggressive continuously. When you're young, it's just your hunger. When you're older, it is a performance, and you have to transition into the person who's performing that task. My job, just like Lucius Fox's job, is to help Bruce Wayne transform into his exemplar self, which is Batman. And I thought about it that way. How do I keep, April Holmes or, Chris Paul? How do I help them transform healthily and safely from Chris Paul to CP3, from April Holmes to the badass Olympian? And so that's where I see myself, man, is I help, provide the gadgets and the tools that provide them with the ability to transform into the exemplar self.
Sorry, go ahead, Sabria.
Oh, I was just gonna ask if you had like your own podcast, your own YouTube
I
channel.
can talk to you all day long, man. I can
You talk all day. I mean, everything you said has just been extremely profound. I'm sitting here trying to think of questions. I'm just thinking about what you just said. So I'm like, wow, like I literally could listen to you all day. But anyway.
I mean, the when you're talking about the crime scene thing, that was taking me back to Batman again. But as we close out, Jason, going back to the Black Footwear Forum in Detroit, you were there, Sabria and I were there. And I've told Sabria this, we do a ton of events at FDRA. I mean, like a ton: sourcing, supply chain, sustainability, so on as trade policy, so on and so forth. We don't ever host events like the Black Footwear Forum from a kind of a spiritual perspective. There's a spirit in the room that moves. There is a love in the room that you don't experience elsewhere. Maybe you experience at church. It feels a lot like church. There's scripture being quoted by Wilson Smith from the stage. There are hugs and high fives from people who maybe never even met. Take off your academic hat and maybe put on like your human hat. Why does that happen at something like the Black Footwear Forum? Maybe you need the academia part of it too, but what's the underlying spirit that's driving that event in a way that doesn't drive any other event that we do?
Yeah, I think it's Black people. I mean, just to be completely blunt, like what folks get wrong or misunderstand about our culture is that we have a high emphasis and high value that we place on family, on inclusion, on acceptability. Like that phrase you hear now, oh, you're invited to the barbecue. All right, that's cool for culture to say that. But what we're really saying is, listen, if we like you regardless of what you look like. If you treat us with respect, we respect you back. If you bring something of value, we reciprocate. It's very, very simple with us. You know what I'm saying? I grew up believing like, people treat you how they meet you. That's what my family would tell you. So if they meet you and you're out here acting a fool and you're showing your behind, as my grandmother would say, that's how they'll treat you. And so what you saw at the Black Footwear Forum were people who were coming with a hard posture of empathy, a hard posture of praise, a hard posture of wanting to see someone that looked like them and to see someone that looked like them that achieved, because we have to remember that we're possible outcomes for everyone in that room. We're not these unicorns. I refuse to be unicorn and othered. Like, you're the special, magical Black man. No, I'm not. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. I'm neurodivergent. I had all the things that society could thrown at me. What I do have is resilience and desire for everyone to feel seen and loved and come as you are. And yes, man, growing up in the church, that was what we were told. Come as you are. You're welcomed as you are. Yeah. And so I think that spirit moves through us as a community, because when you only thing you have is your family, faith is your catalyst. Faith is your fuel. So whether you believe in God or not, there's a spirit of faith that's in the room when that many people who are overlooked and underrepresented and sometimes discounted are in the room. We're going to give each other our flowers. We're going to celebrate. And anybody who was there willingly, who's there to support, you're going to get your flowers and be loved on as well. That's just how it is. Like, you come to any Black function, if you don't have a plate in your hand and you're not sitting down talking to somebody, auntie or uncle, they're going to look at you strange. And it was kind of like that at the Black Footwear Forum. Everybody who was there was engaged in a deep discussion over food, over shoes. And you just saw the essence of our culture on display in the most beautiful way. And what I love about it is it's unexpected, because most people would assume it would have been like Complex Con, a bunch of folks stunting and fronting and too cool and this, that, and the third. Nah, man, 20-something years ago, when we sat as a group, myself, Dwayne, Jeff Henderson, E. Scott, Wilson, Ray Butts, and we were sitting around, and me being a young buck, and we're talking about the world we wanted to create. That was the vision. So the Black Footwear Forum, Penso Lewis started with conversations back in Beaverton 20 plus years ago, where we just decided this isn't enough for us. We have to see more sisters. We have to see more people get opportunities. We have to diversify what we believe value looks like in this industry. And all of us went out and did our own thing. And this was us Voltroning back together, right? We all picked very different paths so that we can combine and share our gifts and talents to create more opportunities for all of us. Because if one of us are hurting, all of us are hurting. And that's just how we see it,
That's awesome. All right, gosh, Voltron, and you're nerding out like all over the place. Love it. So, Bria, you got any other closing thoughts before we clear out? Again, I could talk to Jason all day long. We try to keep these.
Yeah, I think we should get him to come back and just do his own podcast episode on his own.
Exactly. We'll just sit back and watch. We
need us.
Yeah. So, Jason, thank you so much for your partnership, for your friendship, and for your critical thought. We need more thinkers like you in the industry. You're not a unicorn, like you said, but I don't know what to call you. You're a treasure, to be honest with you, and we appreciate it. And we thank you for coming on and sharing your insights to our Shoe and Show audience.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Folks, this has been another amazing edition. We've done 350 episodes. This is one of the higher level conversations we've ever had in our 6.5 years. And I just can't thank you enough for listening in. It's a joy and privilege to host this conversation and other conversations. Hit up shoeandshow.com for other episodes. We have a huge catalog of information. Dr. Dwayne Edwards has been on before a multitude of times. There's a lot of Black voices that have been on our podcast and will continue to be on our podcast. So check those out if that's of interest. Hit up blackfootwearforum.com for the latest on our regional meetups and all the things that we're working on for the next iteration of the national event, and see all the photos and video of the things that you missed out if you weren't able to join us in Detroit. Until next time, thanks again for listening, and Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.